if someone said, okay, well, we've released the mammoth elephants into this part of Alaska, it would be really hard for me not to jump on the first plane to Alaska. That is such a good question, and it's a hard question. And I am of two minds when it comes to that question, because on the one hand, we will likely never be able to properly clone a mammoth. And when I say we, I'm not involved in the science. I mean like scientists generally. Despite all the incredible specimens that I've mentioned, like that foot, or there's entire baby mammoths like Liuba. She was this baby mammoth that was perfectly preserved, with all of her organs and skin and everything intact. But even those, because they were frozen, all of their cells were shredded, basically. There are no intact cells, which you need to be able to do a proper clone, like with Dolly the sheep that a lot of us remember, especially if you were like growing up in the 90s. It was like a really big deal in the news. So that kind of cloning is not possible because it requires an intact cell to be able to do the lab chemistry that you need to do to create a proper clone. On the mammoth genome, like we know that woolly mammoths had red hair, that the red fur that we find is not something that happened to that hair because it was frozen in permafrost for thousands of years. They were born that way. They had the gene for red hair. They had hemoglobin in their blood that allowed them to withstand colder temperatures, right? So there's certain things that we know that made a mammoth look and act like a mammoth. And what you can do is take an elephant genome, and then you can tweak certain genes so that they become more like a mammoth. And that is basically the method that is the most likely and feasible. And then you have to raise that, or that mammoth has to be carried to term, probably by an Asian elephant, because they're easier to get your hands on. And that's the reason, even though they're less closely related to woolly mammoths than some of the African elephants are. And so then that surrogate elephant will give birth to a transgenic or mammothy elephant. And then you need to do that a bunch and then hope to be able to establish some sort of breeding population in a process that will probably take a really long time, if it happens at all. And then the idea by the people that are promoting this work is that their goal is not to just have a mammothy elephant in a cage somewhere, but to have elephants roaming in the wild again. And there's some limitations to our ability to do that, right? I mentioned that mammoths were matriarchal. They had, for lack of a better word, they had culture, just like modern elephants, right? We know that elephants share information, that the matriarch in an elephant herd passes down knowledge to her daughters and granddaughters about where we go during, like if I'm an elephant, we avoid certain places because they're dangerous, or we go here during certain times of year because that's where the food is, right? This is all cultural information that teaches us how to be elephants. A woolly mammoth isn't going to have that. And so there's a lot of questions about whether or not that transgenic elephant that looks mammothy will be truly a mammoth, not because it's not genetically pure if you look at its genome, but because it's separated from its culture by thousands of years. And I use that word, even though I'm a scientist, I use that word culture very deliberately. And so whether or not that project will ever occur in any kind of meaningful sense, I think is up in the air. And there's a part of me that feels deeply unsettled by what we're going to have to do to an awful lot of animals in order to get to that end point, right? And I hope that, I think this is a conversation that a lot of stakeholders need to be involved in, including bioethicists and the indigenous peoples and the communities that, we're proposing to put these mammothy elephants into in the Arctic, for just a couple examples. Having said all of that, all of the caveats about, is it really a mammoth? Is this the right thing to do, morally speaking, to animals that are not consenting to this process? If someone said, okay, well, we've released the mammothy elephants into this part of Alaska, it would be really hard for me not to jump on the first plane to Alaska because, like I've said, I've never gotten to see my study system in person. I've only ever been separated from what I work on by thousands or millions of years. And it's hard not to feel a kind of childlike wonder and pull towards the possibility that technology might allow us to to resurrect something that, that has been gone for thousands of years.